There are a lot of what ifs and changes that may be made to these based off the injuries certain players are dealing with. So I'm going to be trying to give you the most up-to-date injury information as well with this video. So definitely actually listen rather than just skipping to the end and looking at the picture. But starting off with the first two tiers, we don't need to talk about these guys in depth. You for sure start them. Barkley, Kyron, Kamara, Henry, Lamb, Chase, Jefferson, Bijan, Walker, Gibbs, A.J. Brown, Tyree, St. Brown, Taylor, H.N. Neighbors, London. If you have an argument with how they're ranked, I don't particularly care because the fact of the matter is they're in your starting lineup and there's nothing to discuss. Going down to tier 3, maybe this is where you could potentially start to have a conversation. In reality, you start these guys. Aaron Jones is in a massive bounce back spot here going up against the Indianapolis Colts. Right now, you actually have a 26-point implied team total here for this Vikings offense. They are 5-point favorites. Now, obviously, you've had a little bit of a slide here as of late if you are looking at what we have seen with this Minnesota Vikings team in general. But nonetheless, looking at sportsbooks, they are telling us that it should be much better going into the future. And with that under expectations, you also look at the expanded role that you have from Aaron Jones, where Aaron Jones this past week plays a season high 92% of the snaps. He's a lock for 20+ opportunities and a great offense with the receiving role. You start Aaron Jones. James Cook, also great offense with receiving role, red zone role. There's nothing else you'd really want to see. Right now, sportsbooks are putting the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills tied for the #1 scoring offense in the NFL this week. You have about a 7-point spread here where the Bills should be able to run the ball consistently against Miami as well. And last time the Bills played Miami, James Cook did have 28 fantasy points. Now, our next receiver with Puka Nacua, I'm going to have a massive asterisk here. Now, we set these rankings right before the report came out that Puka Nacua was downgraded at practice, had to leave practice early, re-aggravating the same knee injury he had previously. Horrendous news. Now, we had a follow-up report saying, oh, Puka still very easily could play this week. I'm going to be live streaming on Friday night, and I'll tell you anything additional that we have with Puka. Obviously, we do the Saturday live streams as well with injury updates. I will be running a 50-mile ultra marathon on Saturday. I've never done anything like this before, so I have no idea how long it's going to take. So we may or may not be there for the afternoon stream with the injury updates on Saturday. But if not, we will be live extremely late Saturday night as well. If Puka does play, I want him in my lineup. Chris Olave will be our next name with Olave. Phenomenal matchup going up against the Carolina Panthers. It's maybe the highest I've ever ranked Olave in terms of the wide receiver rankings, but this is a statement ranking. You had 14 targets last week, over 100 receiving yards. You have no Shaheed. Derek Carr is coming back in. Should be a much better offense and a very good matchup against Carolina. Now, David Montgomery will be our next play. If you are looking at Montgomery, usually the Detroit Lions project out to be a top 3 offense in total points scored. Here this week, in division game, on the road, sportsbooks are making this a projection where the Lions maybe aren't the best offense in the NFL, and instead they are just an above average offense this week. Obviously, with David Montgomery, he's kind of do or die based off if the touchdown will be there, but to be fair to Montgomery, most weeks the touchdown is there because this is the best offensive line in the league. J.K. Dobbins will be our next option. I wish that I drafted J.K. Dobbins everywhere in underdog drafts this year. Like, it's embarrassing that I didn't. Because right now the man's seeing 20+ opportunities every single game. Obviously, you can have your own opinion on what you think of this Browns matchup, but right now the Chargers are favored in this game. Presumably, they could go out there and run the ball heavily in the second half. You get a career high 82% of the snaps for J.K. Dobbins this past week. And since after the bye, Dobbins has had 27 opportunities, 17 opportunities, and 24 opportunities. Our next guy will be Cooper Kupp. Obviously, you start Kupp regardless, but if you were to have no Puka Nacua, Kupp flies up dramatically in these rankings. Now, going over to our next name, we are going to be looking at Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin, like clockwork, has been a high-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy starting in week 3. The man's been incredible. Now, obviously, if you're looking at the underlying target volume, it's not off the charts. You only have one game with more than 8 targets so far this season. but it's just one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL, where right now Jaden Daniels is playing about the best quarterback you're going to find in the league. Our next option will be Brian Robinson. Super safe play going up against the Giants. Obviously, Washington is favored. This past week against Chicago, I mean, it was kind of a gross game, but I think it should be a more straightforward game where Washington's able to score points, move the ball down the field, run the ball in the red zone. And if you are looking at Brian Robinson, he has increased his snaps every single week over the past 3, working his way back from this injury. DK Metcalf will be our next name. Like we said, obviously Metcalf will be one of these players that you are going to have to continue to monitor the injury updates with. If Metcalf managed to play, it is a really strong matchup going up against the Los Angeles Rams. Josh Jacobs will be our next play. Right now, I just have no idea if Jordan Love's going to be good to go. Regardless, they are going to heavily rely on Jacobs. The issue is it's not a great matchup going up against the Detroit Lions. And if you were to have no Jordan Love, this could potentially be a spot in which Malik Willis has a much lower checkdown rate than what you would have with Love under center. So yeah, you want Love here definitely, just because you have more overall offensive upside, more trips to the red zone, more touchdown opportunities for Josh Jacobs. It just looks like that's probably not going to be the case. Our next guy will be DeAndre Swift. A Swift, you're just printing 20-week opportunities. This past week you had 18, the week prior 21, then 23, 23, 17, 19, and then week 1, 11. But nonetheless, if you ignore week 1, he is averaging about 20 opportunities a game. This matchup here against Arizona is an extremely strong one. I mean, right now this is a game with the spread of about 1.2 points, so you very easily could see the Bears winning this and running the ball in the second half. T. Higgins will be our next name. If you are looking at Higgins, he did not practice on Wednesday and he did not practice on Thursday. So unless you get the Friday practice, T. Higgins very much looks like he could be missing this week. Now, with that being said, if he does manage to practice on Friday, it is a very strong matchup going up against the Raiders here, where you do have an implied team total over 27 points for this Bengals offense. So they should be able to easily move the ball down the field. And I think you would have that Bengals bounce back. Devonta Smith plays on Monday night. With Smith, you're looking at a receiver that every week minus the Giants game, you've had at minimum 15 points. And most weeks, excluding the Giants game and the game you left with a concussion, you've been looking at 20 points here for Devonta Smith. Super consistent option. I mean, here, this is a great matchup against Jacksonville, where I would be very excited to start him, and how I'm starting him in the Flock League myself. And also in this game, if you are new to Underdog Fantasy, you're actually going to be getting a free Jalen Hurts pick, more than less than half a total yard. You would also get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000 over there on Underdog Fantasy, and a free team review in the live stream that we're doing every single night. So of course, if you wanted to claim your free Jalen Hurts pick, just go to the link in the description or comment section, use code FLOCK, get those offers, plus a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Now, our next option will be Kareem Hunt. If you are looking at Hunt here, over the past 3 weeks, 27 opportunities, 22 opportunities, 21 opportunities. I understand everybody screamed at us last week for only having him as an RB2. I'm sorry. I will stand by. He's not going to be a super efficient running back, right? We kind of know Kareem Hunt, I don't want to say is washed at this point, but if we were to rank running backs in the NFL just from a raw talent perspective, I don't think he would be in my top 32. However, it's a phenomenal offense. It's an offense that wants to run the ball, and it's a damn good matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I just want to be realistic. You don't really have the big play upside anymore with Kareem Hunt. He doesn't really have the receiving usage, so that's going to keep him from being like that top-end RB1. But just based off of volume and volume alone, he's still an exciting start. Like, I would start him over James Conner, because we go over and look at Conner, who I'll be starting myself in the Flock League. You do have a tough matchup going up against Chicago. You have another running back that isn't necessarily guaranteed anything as a receiver, but you do have back-to-back weeks here with James Conner with over 80% of the snaps. So it's hilarious. I know we've been talking about this all week, but I drafted James Conner in the Flock League thinking like, okay, I'm going to use this guy at the beginning of the season. I'm going to take the top-end production. I'm going to sell him by the time we get halfway through the year before Trey Benson comes on. And Trey Benson is literally nowhere to be seen. James Conner is that true 3-down workhorse. Now, our next option will be Brian Thomas. If you are looking at Thomas, this is a receiver that last week only plays 51% of the snaps, leaving with the chest injury. but he scored 15 points in 51% of the snaps. The week prior, you only play 66% of the snaps. You scored 22 points. The man's phenomenal. He is one of the best receivers in Dynasty at the moment. And this year, he is going to get that expanded role now that you have no Christian Kirk. He was limited in practice both on Wednesday as well as Thursday. By no means, it's a guarantee that he is going to be playing against the Eagles here. And for that reason, we're going to have him a little bit lower in our weekly rankings than we would in our rest of season. If you go over to flogfantasy.com, you'll see he's higher in my rest of season ranks. I'm going over to Marvin Harrison Jr. Here with Harrison, you have I don't want to say career high. He's right up there tied with his career high, 91% of the snaps in this offense this past week. Again, I do want to reiterate, you're looking at a receiver that does have that high average at the target, that is running those deep routes in this offense, not consistently seeing a lot of target volume, but you do have the big play potential. I mean, if you go through and look at this with Harrison, removing the week where you left early with the concussion, you're looking at 1 point, then 29 points, 17, 15, then down to 5, then another game with 5, and now you get to 23. So he's very much been a boom bust option so far this season. But I mean, with that being said, we expect the rookie receiver to continue to improve as the season goes on. Now, it is a tough matchup this week, however, going up against Chicago. So if you look at my rest of season rankings, we will be higher on Harrison than we are right here. Our next option will be Jalen Waddle. If you are looking at Waddle, I am hoping we finally get something. I have him in the Flock League. I keep starting the dude. But at some point, we may have to throw in the towel and ask, is he not a wide receiver 2 in fantasy? And instead, is he a wide receiver 3? Here against Buffalo, you should assume that you are going to have this Dolphins offense forced to throw the ball a considerable amount. They are touchdown dogs. And if you look at the 2 games that you have had Tua fully healthy in, I mean, you are getting 16 fantasy points and 8.5 fantasy points for Waddle. So it's not like it's been a complete dumpster fire. I'm going over to Amari in this same game. You've gone from 35% of the snaps up to 50% of the snaps this next week. I'd imagine that continues to trend in the positive direction. Obviously, he's been a very inefficient wide receiver all season. We would assume that does get a lot better here now that you're in a much better spot with Josh Allen. This matchup against Miami, again, you do have the Buffalo Bills projected to score the most points in the NFL this week. Jaden Reed will be our next receiver. With Reed, if Jordan Love does not play, you lower him in these rankings. If Jordan Love does play, you move him up in these rankings. So obviously, I will give you the update with Jordan Love later in the week. But I mean, as things stand right now, you are looking at an option that, I mean, hasn't given you a single game with more than 8 targets, and he's had 1 game with more than 6 targets. So he's very much boom bust. You don't have the underlying volume. DJ Moore, you have a really good matchup going up against Arizona. Obviously, we're expecting with this ranking that Caleb Williams does perform a lot better than what we had in the Washington contest. But yeah, I mean, it was just a horrendous game for Caleb coming out of the bye. If you look previous to that, obviously Caleb had shown continued improvement pretty much to the first half of the season. Tyrone Tracy will be our next name. With Tracy, obviously very difficult to rank at this point with the concussion. He did not practice on Wednesday. He got in a limited practice on Thursday. Again, I do want to reiterate, I was expecting that Tracy wasn't going to be playing this week, considering the fact that this was a concussion that was suffered on Monday. But if Tracy manages to play, he has shown that he is for sure the starting running back in this offense. And with that being said as well, I mean, at the end of the day, you are looking at a player that does have a better offensive projection this week than what the Giants had last week. Where last week against the Steelers, sportsbooks were projecting them to be the worst offense in the NFL. And this week you'd have an implied team total of about 20 points against Washington. Chase Brown will be our next option, where if you're looking at Chase Brown, well, yes, you do end up getting about the same amount of snaps played from Zach Moss over the past 2 weeks. The underlying usage here has really skewed favorably in the direction of Brown himself. Over the past 5 games, every single game you've at least had double-digit carries. Every single game you've had about 3 to 4 targets out of the backfield too. And maybe the only hesitation that you have with this, obviously, is the Zach Moss usage. but this should be a pretty comfortable spot in terms of what we are going to get with the matchup against the Raiders, where the Bengals offense does project to be one of the best offenses in the league. Tony Pollard will be our next name. With Pollard, it is impossible to rank him. Pollard's not at practice. Spears isn't at practice. I'm going to assume that Pollard probably ends up playing here with these rankings, but it's just an assumption. I'm just guessing, okay, if Pollard does play, this is where I rank him. Very easily, you could see Pollard miss this week. Our next name will be Darnell Mooney. I want to start as many Falcons and Cowboys players this week as I can. Right now, this game has an over-under of about 52 points. Sportsbooks are projecting it to be the highest scoring game of the week, and they are currently projecting the Falcons to be the third highest scoring offense in the NFL, only behind the combination of the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. Darnell Mooney is very much an up and down option that lives and dies based off what you have specifically from Kirk Cousins that week. But sportsbooks are telling us that we can possibly expect a big Cousins week. And honestly, in the Flock League, Cousins just got dropped. And I just spent $3 fab picking up Caleb, but I may drop Caleb to go get Cousins, to be honest. Our next option will be Josh Downs. With Downs, obviously, looks to be an extremely exciting start here. Minnesota's a great defense, but at the same time, they have allowed a ton of points to opposing wide receivers. And you have Joe Flacco under center instead of Anthony Richardson. So previously last week, I apologize. I didn't rank Josh Downs or Michael Pittman Jr. as startable options, specifically because the quarterback play that you had with A-Rich. Downs says, you know what? I don't care. He goes out and you end up getting the 22 fantasy points in a game in which, I mean, it's crazy. A-Rich has like 160 passing yards. So should be very excited about what you have with Downs going into the future. Ramondre Stevenson will be our next name. Looking at Ramondre, I am throwing in the towel. I am going to be playing him in the Flock League over Javonte Williams. We'll throw Javonte in here right after. Looking at Ramondre, currently the Patriots project to be the worst offense in the NFL with no Drake May. But with the Broncos, you actually do have them as well projecting out extremely poorly. Where typically what we've been used to is seeing the Broncos project to, over the past 2 weeks, be a top 10 offense. And that's exactly what's happened. Bo Nix has crushed it. The Broncos have crushed it. But this week against the Ravens, you have a spread in this game, 8.5 points, an implied team total only 18 for Denver. I think this is a trap game. If you're excited to play Bo Nix, if you're excited to play Javonte Williams, I would strongly reconsider that, or recommend reconsidering that. So I'm going to go with Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre and the Patriots are underdogs in this game. Any game where it has not been close and New England's got blown out, Ramondre has been horrendous in. Any game where New England's won or has gone to overtime, Ramondre's been great in. So I'm rolling the dice that the Patriots end up winning this week. I'm starting Ramondre over Javonte, and hopefully it doesn't bite me in the butt. The other guy I'm starting Ramondre over is Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey is going to be on my bench here. I benched him last week. He gives you the 29 points with the multiple receiving touchdowns, but the man had 111 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns off of 6 targets. Looks phenomenal in Dynasty. Couldn't be more excited. I'm very excited about Ladd McConkey rest of season. Like, I have Ladd higher than this in our rest of season rankings. Just before I go through and before I start him over somebody like Ramondre Stevenson, I do think that I would prefer to see him go out there and see a game with more than 8 targets. But please let me know what you think in the comment section. Like, am I making the right decision here? Really, these are the 3 players in my league that I have to consider: Ramondre, Javonte, and Ladd. Right now, I'm going with Ramondre Stevenson, but it could help me out a ton if you think I'm wrong. Zay Flowers will be our next option. With Flowers, brutal matchup going up against Denver. The Broncos have allowed the fewest points to opposing wide receivers so far this season. And at the same time, you have Deontay Johnson coming over. More likely than not, this is going to be a Ravens team that's able to run the ball over and over and over again. But something to be on the lookout for on Friday is the fact that Lamar missed practice on Wednesday and Lamar missed practice on Thursday. So definitely need to make sure that Lamar is practicing on Friday and will be good to go for this weekend. Now, going over to our next name, we're going to be looking at Rico Dowdle. Dowdle's been very bad for a very long time. I'm giving Dowdle the benefit of the doubt here. And by very bad for a very long time, Against Detroit, the Cowboys get blown out. Then you have the bye week, and then he doesn't play with the illness. But it's not like Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott did anything to be inspiring and take over this starting job. And again, I do want to reiterate, in this game against the Atlanta Falcons, I personally want to start as many options here in Dallas and in Atlanta as I possibly can, where it projects to be the highest scoring offense in the league. And from what I could tell, Rico Dallas still starting running back here in Dallas. You have an applied team total of this team over 25 points. I'm fine running with it. Our next two guys with the combo of Alexander Mattison, Rachaad White, garbage offenses. Alexander Madison's going to have the volume, and it's not a horrible matchup against Cincinnati. The thing is, just with this offense in particular, in this past week, you had 14 carries for 15 rushing yards. One, I think Alexander Madison's not a great running back. And two, at the same time, a lot of this is just because teams don't have to respect Gardner Minshew. And then Rachaad White. White has been way better than this over the past 2 weeks. Obviously, I understand that. You can let me hear it in the comment section. But Rachaad White over the past 2 weeks is averaging about 25 points or 22, 23 points per game. Now, you're going up against the Chiefs. I know a lot of people are upset with us with how low we rank the other Bucs players. But I do want to reiterate what we look at consistently, and it's because they have proven over a large sample, and obviously if you think 2 seconds about it, it's obvious. Sportsbooks know more than you do. They know more than I do. They have more information than anybody else. And they are currently projecting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to be a bottom 5 offense this week against KC. It's a brutal matchup. This is the toughest matchup for any running back to go up against. Now, I will say, of course, that specifically with Rachaad White, this maybe is a situation in which you can say that it doesn't matter as much because White has the receiving usage and you're not just banking on what you're going to get with touchdowns. Now, going over to our next option, we're going to be looking at DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins this past week obviously barely played against the Raiders, but in his second week in here, I'm expecting more snaps. I'm expecting more routes. And also right now, Tampa's at the very top of fantasy football and allowing points to opposing receivers. Over the past 2 weeks, we have seen 9 passing touchdowns against this Bucs offense, and you have an implied team total of about 27.5 points here for KC. I'm going over to the next option. We're going to be looking at Calvin Ridley. Ridley over the past 3 weeks has been insane with the target volume. I mean, Ridley over the past 3 weeks is sitting here with about 11 to 12 targets per game. Now, with that being said, you've had 0, 42, and then 143 receiving yards. I'm hoping Levis is the guy. I'm going to give Ridley the benefit of the doubt, though, because if you are looking at sportsbooks, they are projecting an applied team total here about 20 points against New England. So they are telling us that the Titans should be better this week than they have been in the past. I don't know how much we can use Ridley's week last week to project going into the future, just because that game against the Lions wasn't a real football game. Our next option will be Xavier Worthy. Worthy hasn't been great over the past 2 weeks. You've had 5 points and about 14 points. But underlying this, you've had 8 targets each week as well. So, I mean, this is a rookie receiver that coming out of the bye week is back-to-back weeks with his career high in targets. I think that's something to be excited about in this offense. Jacoby Myers will be our next name. I think Myers definitely has a much higher floor than what you have with guys like Ridley, Worthy, Hopkins. And to be honest with you, I'm probably being a little bit of a biased Texas Longhorn fan. Maybe I'm overrating how important the offensive play here is in KC in comparison to Las Vegas. As I think, realistically speaking, you probably should rank Jacoby Myers at the top of this tier. Nick Chubb will be our next player. With Chubb going up against the Chargers, it's a pretty tough matchup. You have no usage as a receiver. You have 1 reception for 10 receiving yards over the past 2 weeks. We're not going to expect super efficient play here coming off a significant injury until we actually see it. So I don't want to come out and aggressively rank Nick Chubb until we see him actually start to be that efficient option and maybe expand the role as a receiver. Bucky Irving's been great over the past really 3 weeks. I'm very excited about Bucky Irving rest of season, But with that being said, again, similar to what we were talking about with Rashad White, this is not the week to play your Bucs, especially not the week to play the Bucs running backs, specifically going up against the toughest defense against all opposing RBs with the Kansas City Chiefs. Our next option will be Cedric Tillman. I understand everybody wants to scream at us that we're too low on Tillman. I do want to reiterate, if you think I'm too low on Tillman, you can go over to Underdog Fantasy. Links in the description, links in the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK, you're going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, and you can take Cedric Tillman to have more than 45 net receiving yards. Over the past 2 weeks, he's been phenomenal. Over the past 2 weeks, he is averaging about 23, 24 fantasy points per game. He's been cooking since you've had specifically Jameis under center. Now, with that being said, this past week, I mean, you did have Elijah Moore sitting with more targets. Now, of course, is that a guarantee going into the future? Of course not. Now, going over to our next player, we are going to be looking at what we have with JSN. Jackson Smith and Jigba would dramatically move up if DK Metcalf were to be out. But I do think that JSN has demonstrated at this point that he is for sure the wide receiver 2 in KC. Our next two guys will be Shakir and Keon Coleman. I mean, we're pretty much going to be putting them back to back every single week until we are shown otherwise. I mean, for how I view this right now, I do think Amari expands his role. I still view Amari as the wide receiver 1 here in Buffalo. And I think that all these guys are, especially the secondary options, are going to be volatile, but it's a very good offense where you have touchdown upside. Michael Pittman Jr. will be our next option with Pittman. Over the past 3 weeks, we've seen 5, 5, and 6 targets. I think Josh Downs has kind of cemented himself as the number 1 option at this point. Obviously, you can make an argument, well, the Vikings give up so many points to opposing wide receivers, while at the same time, you're going to be looking at a team that should be trailing here as well. Specifically with the Vikings favored by 4 or 5 points, you could see the Colts force to throw the ball consistently. Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne will be our next 2 names. I have absolutely no idea how to rank these players. If Etienne misses, then Bigsby flies up. Jordan Addison, Keenan Allen are desperation plays. You can go with them if you really want to. I probably want it. And then looking at the Carolina Panthers running backs, if Jonathan Brooks plays, I don't think either guy is startable, but obviously if Brooks misses, then at that point you move Chuba Hubbard dramatically up. But I really hope I was able to help you all out in some way with this. And of course, I do want to reiterate, if you want to scream at me that I'm way too low on Cedric Tillman, you can take the higher than 45.5 receiving yards over there on Underdog Fantasy. The link's in the description, the link's in the comment section. Code FLOCK, we give that 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, plus that free Jalen Hurts pick, more than less than half a total yard. Plus, you will get a free team review in the live stream we're doing every single night. Just make sure that you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your account on Underdog Fantasy if you are wanting that free team review. But thank you again. I really appreciate you and really hope I get to see you out with the live stream tonight.